Welcome to the second part of Blocks Not From Scratch. In the first part, we dealt with altering commercially available blocks to be a bit more convincing when installed on a ship model, specifically those blocks offered by Blue Jacket ship crafters. They're cast in Britannia metal, and with just a bit of tweaking, they give a pretty convincing rendition of a pulley block. In this video, we'll be taking a closer look at wooden blocks available to the ship model builder, and offer a couple of strategies for making these blocks appear more accurate. We'll even use some practices that approach full-size methods. But before we begin, it might be helpful to take a look at a few different rigging situations and notice how the blocks, the line, the hardware, and rigging practices like serving and splicing and seizing all work together. Now, looking at this big double block, we can see that the strap is a heavy line that's been completely served, and at the deck end there is a round thimble with a rather large hook turned into the thimble, and the strap is seized at about the midpoint. At the opposite end, the standing end of the running line is tied into the becket. The block stowed location on the deck and the tied rather than spliced standing end of the running line might lead one to believe that this is not a permanent part of the ship's rig. Rather, it is brought out for a specific purpose. It might be used for loading and unloading the ship's provisions, or perhaps it's a boat tackle. Whatever the case, it's interesting to note the treatment of the block. Here we see part of the ground tackle for the Charles W. Morgan. That cutting-in tackle had to withstand extremely heavy use, and that thick external iron strap bolted at the top and bottom is a clear indication that its builder did not want this block to fail under any conditions. The size of the ring and the shackle speak to the great stress that this block would have had to withstand. The blubber hook, only partially visible in the photo, weighed 200 pounds all by itself. In this photo, the Charles W. Morgan's port side main and topsail braces, we see a slightly different treatment for two pieces of rigging essentially doing the same job. Small variations in applications is something worth being aware of as we build our own models. The single pendant in this photo will be the focus of this video. As we take a close look at this piece of rigging, we see that it is an externally stropped block, and that the pendant, and thus the strap, are wire, not rope, and that it is served only around the block. Then it is spliced, and then the splicing is served. The treatment at the end attached to the yard is basically the same. There is a thimble and a splice, but there is no serving around the thimble, only the splice. Now, to make our pendant, I'll be using a 1/4-inch block from Siren Ship Model Company. We saw in an earlier video that the dimensions of this block come very close to the actual proportions of 19th century blocks, so there is a minimum of alteration needed. It was also my intention in this video to address the type of blocks that seem to find their way into many kits. They look much like this. The dimensions of this block are wrong in every direction. The shape is too box-like, the groove for the swallow is too shallow and too wide, and finally, the Shiv hole is not chamfered, which turns out to be the least of its problems. Put simply, there's no effective way to correct the inaccuracies of this block without huge investments of time and effort. There's still no guarantee of consistent results. If I were building a kit and these were the blocks applied, I would not hesitate to buy aftermarket blocks. The little bit of extra money spent will pay huge dividends in time saved and increased accuracy. But enough about what we're not covering. Let's move into the shop. So, we're out in the shop, and we're going to start making that pendant and that single block. We're going to take a little spin around the table here and look at the lathe over there, and we're going to see what we need to do this, and then we're going to get started. Okay, I'm going to start way off on the left here, and there I have a piece of sandpaper that's been glued onto a piece of glass, and I'm going to use that to alter the thickness of the block that we're going to use, because it's a wee bit too thick. I've got two Dremel tools, one with a drill bit that I'm going to need to chamfer the Shiv holes in that block. Any of the alterations I do on the block. I might leave little furry bits of wood fibers, loose fibers, and I like to buff them down with that Scotch-Brite wheel that you can get from Dremel. There's the block itself. Now in the foreground you'll see the piece of wire that we're going to be using to make the pendant, and you'll see the block, and on the right hand side there, coming up into the middle of the frame now, is the wire that we're going to use to make the wire cable or the wire pendant. The pendant is, we're going to be working in 1/2 inch scale, and from what I can see in the picture, that is probably about a 1/2 inch cable, and might be a little bigger, might be a little smaller, but I'm guessing 1/2 inch. At 1/2 inch to the foot, that comes out to about 20 thousandths. So if I come close to 20 thousandths, 18 thousandths, 20 thousandths, 21 thousandths, that'll be fine. And I'm using that wire that you see there. If I were putting this on a real model, I wouldn't use that wire because that's steel wire, and I don't like using steel. It has the potential to rust. So I'm using this only for the demonstration. If you're going to use wire on your models, use nichrome wire. If you can get stainless steel wire, if you need bright wire like that, if you need just any wire that you're going to make black, brass, copper, they work pretty well. They're pretty easy to work with and easy to find. So you'll see that there's a couple of tricks to working with wire, and I'll show you those during the course of the video. And over on the right hand side, moving along, we've got our ever faithful 20 thousandths rigging line, which I'm going to be using for this because it's about a 1 inch line that looks like it's going through those blocks. Got a few hand tools, nothing special, pliers, wire cutters. I've got a little torch there, and you're probably wondering what's he going to do with the torch. Well, I'll show you almost at the end of the video. Now here we have a serving machine, and a serving machine is not something you're going to come by at the local hobby shop. This one I made, and I made it a million years ago. I also, when I first made it, it was made with a hand crank, and if you look in the left hand end there, you'll see a block sticking out with a half circle in it. That actually held a shaft and a pinion gear, and it had a handle on it, and so I was able to hand crank the serving machine. But I then altered it because I was doing so much serving of very long lengths of line, 15 inches, 18 inches, all the way up to I think 40 inches was the longest I had to do in one continuous piece. So that much serving by hand you can't do. So I altered it to fit on my lathe, and you'll see later on how the machine fits on the lathe and how I use it. Now, as far as building one of these things, it's really not complicated. Just takes a little time, and it's going to take a trip to the hobby shop because you're going to need 4 gears of the same tooth count, same pitch, and some either brass tubing or brass rod stock, whichever you want to use. I prefer tubing, but I'm not going to bother really spending a lot of time on how I built this because that's a whole video all by itself, and that'll come later on down the road. Now, the lathe we're going to use for 2 operations on this. We're going to use it to use the serving machine, like I said, but we're also going to use it to actually lay up the wire cable that we're going to need. And you don't need the lathe for this. This can be done with any drill or anything that spins that you can control the RPMs of, because you have to start out very slow, and then as the wire winds up you can bring up the speed a bit, but you really need to start out very slowly. So that's it. That's what we'll need to get started. Alright, so if you saw part 1 of this video on blocks, you remember that these blocks were a little bit oversized, so we need to make a few small alterations to this block, and we're going to start by sanding it down. And I'm just going to sand it. I know it seems a little low tech, but I'm just going to count the number of strokes. Alright, 20 strokes on one side, and we'll do 20 on the other. And let's see, we have to come out to about somewhere between 86 and 87 thousandths, 88,000, something like that. So let's see what we've got here. Oh, look at that. 87 thousandths on the nose. Not too shabby. Okay, the next thing that we need to do, now you noticed that there was a groove running the full length of the side of the block. That groove is almost gone, and that's okay, because all we really need is to have a groove at the bottom and top, a little triangular shaped groove, and we're going to cut that in. Now, another useful thing to have is just take a piece of dowel and put a straight pin in the end, put the block on it, and then drill your second hole so that you can just put a second pin in there and the block will be held in place. It always registers on the two pins. So as long as the company drilled the holes consistently, and I think they pretty much do. I just grabbed a random block and this one fits nicely, then you're okay. So we're going to use this as soon as I find my cheaters. I'm going to use this to hold the block, and I'm going to take a triangular needle file and you don't need much here. A little bit at the top. Actually, there is no top and bottom to this block at this point. We'll make one. There. Let's see how close I can get. Okay, so that's really all you need. Now, the next step in the alteration of the block, I'm going fairly slowly here, but generally when I work quicker. So this might seem like it's taking a long time, but it really actually doesn't, especially after you get used to doing it. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to chamfer the hole for the Shiv, and there's really only need to do the top. I don't need to do both holes, both sides. So we're going to go in. Once we're in, then I can start angling the bit down slowly and letting it eat away at the inside, chamfering the groove inside the block. That's probably enough. And that's enough. That's good. Alright, so the block has been prepared. The only thing left to do is to buff off any fur that we've raised by handling it. Okay, here we go. So the block is ready. Now the next thing we need to do is prepare the wire that's going to make the pendant. Alright. So now, we're going to take this wire and I'm going to uncoil what we need without putting any twists in it. And I'm going to have to do this for quite a length. We need about 4 feet of this. And as you can see, hopefully you can see, this wire is pretty gnarly. So I'm going to have to straighten it out. And there's an easy way to do that, but you're not going to be able to see it if I do it on this piece. Hopefully you'll be able to see it if I do it on this little piece of brass wire right here. And you can see this is pretty gnarly too. It involves taking 2 pairs of pliers. You may know this trick, you may not, but all the wire will stretch a little bit. It has some stretch to it. So you just grab it with those 2 pliers and you start pulling in opposite directions. Now I'm going to do this on purpose. You have to be a bit careful here, because if you put too much pressure on it, you can actually snap the wire. And I'll show you just how easily that happens. But before it happens, you'll feel the wire stretch and straighten out. Now this is what it looks like after you've straightened it out. I don't know if you can see that or not, but there you have it. It's nice and straight. That's what we want to do with that wire before we lay it up into cable. But I wanted to show you just how easy it is. You'll be stretching along and you'll feel the wire stretch and you'll say, hey, this is great. It's straightening out, and then you go, oh no! And it just broke off. Fortunately, this piece broke off right at where the pliers grabbed it. It usually breaks off in the middle. You don't want it to happen. But that's a fast method for straightening out wire. I'm going to do that with this piece of wire that I had taken off that card, and I'll do that off camera and I'll come back. Okay, so here I've got the lathe turned on, and we're going to be going in a counterclockwise position, or direction rather, and I've got 3 strands of the wire all laid up, and I'm holding them. You can't see them, it's off the frame, but I'm holding them at the other end with a pair of pliers, and I'm holding a little bit of tension on there. I'm just going to take the lathe and turn it on very slowly and let the wire wind up. Every once in a while you want to check the progress. Like right now, I know it's got a ways to go yet because all of the lays of the strands are a little too far apart. But you'll be able to see them get closer together, and you'll feel the wire pulling in towards the headstock, or towards the drill. If you're not using a lathe, you're using a drill. So you want to check that every once in a while. So spin it back down to 0, put your cheaters on, and look at the lay that you have. And this, actually just a little bit more, will probably be enough. So I'll just do it a few more revolutions. And then I think that'll be enough. Yeah, that looks very nice. Looks like real cable. Okay, so that's it. So you just release it from the pliers, and sometimes it has a little bit of twist in it, sometimes it doesn't. And we just cut it loose. Cut off the end where I grabbed it. And there, you've got a nice piece of cable, suitable for serving. So, since we only need a small portion of our cable to actually be served, we've got to mark that out. So it's basically just an inch, the quarter, the half inch, and the thickness of the block, and just a little bit so that when we make the shoulders at the top end of the block, it'll have enough to cover. So we've got about an inch that we need to serve. It goes from here, not even, 3/4 of an inch maybe. There you go. And that's it. Too much stray from my marks. There. Now, as you can see, I've got a little bulldog clip on the end of the wire, on the end of the serving line, and that's there for some weight. Just follow along as the line spins up. Just a light coat of CA all the way up to the second mark. And when it gets to the second mark, we stop it. So you can get a better look at that. At this point, I just untwisted the strands of the wire around the free end and then wrapped them around the standing leg. There was no way to film this without knuckles and palms in the shot, so I just had to resort to a still photograph. And we pick up the live action back on the lathe. Here I used a strongly backlit photo to highlight the fuzz that appears on rigging line when handled, even just a little. To deal with this, I use a small torch to singe off the unwanted hair and leave the line looking clean. It can be used effectively on most types of natural rigging line, linen, cotton, silk. I'm not sure if you can use it on synthetics like nylon and monofilament, but these shouldn't be used on ship models anyway. I shouldn't have to say this, but you need to be very careful with this. A moment's inattention can send all your hard work up in flames. So, start far away from the piece and slowly move the flame in, waving it back and forth until you start to see the hairs disappear. Then stop. It's probably a good idea to practice on some scrap line before trying it on the real thing. The thimble was essentially treated just like the block end of the pendant, served for just a bit more than the length of its splice. When it was finished, I gave it a good singeing, and then a coat of white glue with a bit of black paint mixed in to bring it a little closer in appearance to our real pendant. And here you see the final result. How close did I come to the real thing? Pretty close. Could I have come closer? Sure. If I bothered to measure the actual piece, I could have sized all the components more accurately. But for this demonstration, it serves the purpose. And that purpose is to show how basic components of model shipbuilding can, with a small amount of effort and initiative, come very close to the real thing. Now, I know that this seems like a lot of effort to go through just for one piece of rigging, on a model that would literally have hundreds just like it. But as I said in an earlier video, we should be looking at each piece we make for the larger model as a legitimate model all on its own. If we can shift our perception just that much, then we don't have to get through the hull planking or dread the coming chore of the rigging. We can become the shipwright building the hull. We think like the shipsmith forging the shackles. We have a better understanding of the physics that guide the rigger. The model that results from these perceptions cannot help but have a higher degree of realism and accuracy, and hence a larger truth. They will draw their viewer in to take a deeper look and create that compelling impression of an actual vessel. I hope this video will inspire you to look beyond the kit in the instruction book and create something more than just another Constitution or just another Blue Nose. Take this opportunity to know your subject more intimately and let your model be the reflection of that knowledge. Thanks for watching.